Some empires end with a huge explosion. Others just kind of fade away. But the British Empire, its story ends with a phone call. Just one phone call. So picture this. It's November 6th, 1956. You're in London. A guy named Harold Macmillan, he's basically the finance minister for the whole British Empire, is sitting in his office. The phone rings. It's Washington, D.C. on the line, and they've got a message. And that message, it's simple, and it is absolutely brutal. It's an ultimatum, plain and simple. Get out of Egypt right now, or we're going to weaponize finance. The threat was clear. The United States was ready to dump all its British pounds on the market and just destroy the currency, literally overnight. And Macmillan, he doesn't even argue. I mean, how could he?
All right, let's really get into this, because for more than 100 years, the British pound was the world's money. And in just 8 days, it was brought to its knees. Not by tanks or soldiers, but by a financial attack. This is the story of how a currency war toppled a global power. The speed of this whole thing is just mind-blowing. 8 days. That's it. That's all it took to basically end an empire. Think about it. On day 1, Britain's a major world power, sending troops into Egypt. By day 3, President Eisenhower in the US gives the order, get the financial weapon ready. Just 2 days later, day 5, the Bank of England is hemorrhaging cash, losing massive amounts of its reserves. And by day 8, it's all over. A complete and humiliating surrender.
Okay, so to really grasp how big of a deal this was, we've got to understand what Britain actually had. What does it even mean to be the world's reserve currency? Well, back at the turn of the 20th century, the pound was the undisputed king. We're talking more than 60% of all global money reserves were held in pounds. And the US dollar? Get this, it held 0. It was just total, absolute dominance.
And the pound's power, it wasn't just some number on a spreadsheet. It was a whole global system. Over 60% of all world trade was done in pounds. You had this huge sterling zone of countries, from Australia to India, all tied to it. And the backing for all this? Yeah, there was gold, sure, but the real backing was raw military power. British bases were sitting on the world's most critical trade routes, like the Suez Canal, which they literally called the jugular vein of the empire.
But here's the thing. Underneath all that power, there was a fatal flaw. It's the same weakness that can bring down any bank, really. A crisis of confidence. The whole system, this whole empire of currency, it was kind of like a house of cards. It only stood up as long as everyone believed it would. The second a few big players decided they wanted their money back, the entire structure was at risk. And this is where the math just gets scary. The amount of British pounds held by other countries was 3, maybe even 4 times bigger than the actual gold Britain had in its vaults. It's the classic recipe for a bank run, right? Britain had basically written way, way more checks than it could ever cash if everyone decided to show up at the bank on the same day. And in 1956, that's exactly what America threatened to make happen. So, that Suez Crisis, that was the mortal wound. But the death of the pound, that was long, and it was slow. And this is where the story gets really personal. It stops being about prime ministers and presidents and starts being about regular folks and the life savings they had worked so hard to build. For 40 years, think about that, 40 years, from 1939 all the way to 1979, the British government put these strict controls in place. What did that mean for you if you were a regular person? It meant you were trapped. You couldn't legally take your money out of the country. You couldn't buy gold to protect yourself. You couldn't even open a Swiss bank account. You were locked inside a currency that was just bleeding value year after year. And what were the politicians saying while all this was going on? Well, in 1967, right after a huge devaluation, the prime minister, a guy named Harold Wilson, gets on TV and tells the entire country this incredible lie. He says, and I quote, "The pound in your pocket has not been devalued." I mean, just unbelievable. Of course it had been, and everybody knew it. So at first, the loss of value was kinda slow, like a creep. But then it started to gallop. By 1974, inflation in the UK hits 16%. Just try to imagine that for a second. 16% of your savings just gone in 1 year. But believe it or not, it was about to get a whole lot worse. Because the very next year, 1975, inflation skyrockets to an unbelievable 24%. 24%! That means a full quarter of your life savings just vanished. Poof! Gone in 12 months. And look, this isn't just a number on a chart. This is the real story of millions of people. Let's just call her Margaret. She could be a school teacher, a factory worker, a retiree. She did everything she was supposed to do, right? She worked her whole life, saved her money diligently in the currency of her country because she trusted the system. And what was her reward? She was trapped, forced to sit and watch as 60% of her life's work was just inflated away.
So, as the pound is on its deathbed, a new king is waiting in the wings to take the throne. Because the story of the pound's collapse is also, at the exact same time, the story of the US dollar's incredible rise to power.
And this didn't happen by accident. It happened because of two, frankly, brilliant geopolitical moves. First, you've got the Quincy Agreement in 1945. Basically, the US promised to provide military protection for Saudi Arabia, and in return, it got secure access to all that oil. Then came the masterstroke in 1974, the Petrodollar deal. The US gets OPEC to agree to sell all their oil only in US dollars. That created a permanent global demand for the dollar. See, after the US completely ditched the gold standard in 1971, the dollar kind of needed a new anchor, something to give it value. And it found that anchor in oil. Suddenly, the dollar wasn't backed by gold anymore. It was backed by oil and, crucially, by the American military's promise to keep the global oil trade safe. So if you were a country and you needed to buy energy, you needed US dollars. Period. And all of this whole story, brings us right to today. Because what happened to the pound isn't just some dusty old history lesson. It's a pattern, a playbook even. And it raises some really uncomfortable questions about the currency that we all use right now, the US dollar. I mean, the parallels are kind of startling when you look at them. You've got a US national debt that's blown past $39 trillion. For the first time in history, just the interest payments on that debt cost more than the entire military budget. You see the dollar's share of global reserves slowly but surely shrinking over 2 decades. And what are central banks around the world doing? They're buying up physical gold like it's going out of style, at a record pace. Throw in huge geopolitical shifts like Saudi Arabia, a key U.S. ally for decades, joining the BRICS group of nations. And, well, those cracks in the foundation start to look very familiar, don't they? So let's just lay it out side by side. Then, the pound was backed by global trade and military power. Now, the dollar is backed by global oil trade and military power. The vulnerability then? Way more promises out there than actual gold in the vault. The vulnerability now? A mountain of national debt that's chipping away at global trust. The trigger back then? A geopolitical crisis at a choke point, the Suez Canal. The challenge now? Shifting alliances over energy in a world that's becoming more and more multipolar. The echoes of history, they're pretty loud, you gotta admit. So, what does this all mean? We're left with this huge unfolding question, because as we saw with the story of the pound, the fall of a major currency isn't some abstract economic event. It has real, profound, and often painful consequences for the people, for the savers who are caught in the middle of it. This really gets to the heart of it. The whole petrodollar system, the dollar's dominance, it all rests on America's promise to protect the global oil trade. But what happens if that promise starts to look shaky? If the US can't, or maybe even won't, protect that flow of energy for everyone, then why on earth should the rest of the world keep pricing that energy in America's currency? And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. History teaches us that these massive shifts, they don't just happen with a flick of a switch. It's a long, slow bleed. And while it's happening, governments, well, they rarely tell you the whole truth. Just ask Harold Wilson. So the question we all have to ask ourselves, the question Margaret never really got the chance to ask, is this. When a currency's story finally comes to an end, what happens to the savers who are trapped inside?